evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Quandra Spades, and I'm here with my co-host Patrick Brutus and our special guest, Attorney David E. Trice. And welcome to our show presented to you by Help One Save One. Help One Save One is a community-inspired organization. Our goals is to empower and educate the community on information designed to inform and enlighten. We encourage all our viewers to please call in at 312-738-1060. Once again, that's 738-1060. CAN-TV is an interactive show, so we would love to hear from you. Last week, we discussed police brutality and accountability with Mike Elliott. It was an excellent show. We encourage you all to go online to YouTube or even visit our Facebook page. You can go onto our Facebook page at Help One Save One at Facebook. Also, we have our guest today. He's going to be talking about a very interesting topic on estate planning. As mentioned in previous shows, that the 1968 Kerner Commission report will lay the foundation, the groundwork to support the topics we will be discussing over the remaining weeks here on our show. It is our intent to create a progressive informational discussion around our journey as African Americans by examining where we once were, where we want to be, and where we actually are. And with that all being said, I would like to turn the show over to Patrick Bruce, who's going to introduce our guests.
Good afternoon, Chicago, and welcome again to the show. We're very proud and pleased to have Attorney David Trice with us this afternoon. And we're going to be talking about estate planning. Like Quandra said, the 1968 Kerner Commission report has laid out a number of things that we should be looking out for as Black people. 50 years later, however, our estate, our finances, our ownership of property is in disarray today. In many of our urban cities where a lot of Black folks are located, we have issues with ownership of property, we have issues with division of assets. And so, David, you're going to talk to us about that today. And so, quick first question. A lot of folks out there have a challenge understanding the differences between financial planning and estate planning. David, as you tell us what you do, who you are, and where you work, and who you serve, can you also lay out exactly the nuances between the two?
Okay, and thank you, Patrick, and thank you, Quandra. One of the things that comes up in when these topics come up about estate planning and how we're going to, handle those kinds of things, is the idea of how do we transition this property for our families. My name is David Trice, as you have suggested, and I am an attorney. In full disclosure, I work with Quandra. I concentrate my practice mainly in wills, trusts, powers of attorney for seniors. And the reason why I do it mainly for seniors is usually that's the time when people start to think about the ideas of estate planning. When we're younger, we think we're going to live forever. We think that the most important things that are in our lives are ever present. But as we get older, the idea of what happens to ourselves and our property as time goes on, we start to think about that more and more as time goes on. So again, I talk to anybody about their estate plans, and it's always a good time to think of our estate planning because mortality is we are mortal. We're not going to live forever. And at some point it's going to transition. But back to your question of how do we distinguish financial planning from estate planning, you should think of estate planning as a subset of financial planning. Our financial plan can be something that incorporates our holdings, our whether it would be a home, whether it would be a car, whether it would be
Our assets, as it were.
yeah, as our assets, again, our 401ks or our insurance policies, our bank accounts, our brokerage accounts, anything that we have and hold and we can put in our names, those become the assets that we hold. Those become part of our estate. again, and we, as we talk about the different topics of the estate planning and how it may be different in the Black community than in the larger communities or the more wealthy communities, the white community or other communities have actually passed this in some areas.
Interesting that you said that, Attorney Trice, regarding the Black family variance between Black and white. And according to recent studies, 50% of African Americans die without a will. I want to repeat that for our viewing audience at home. Over 50% of Black families in this country die without a will. Is that unusual, or is it time to change that?
I think that I'm not familiar with that statistic, but I think that that we as a community do not do the proper estate planning is probably greater than 50% not having a will. But it happens as a result of our understanding of what a will does. I mean, a will does three things, and I'm going to try to bring that into some context. The first thing it does is says who you want to have in charge of your estate at the time of your death, how you want your bodily remains to be handled, and how you want your property to be distributed at your death. There are certain assets that your will has supervision over. And so if, let's say, for example, one of our members of our community does not have a home or does not have a car or does not have a lot of the consumer assets that or even the brokerage or banking assets that a lot of communities do have, then they think that they do not need a will to handle or to help manage those kinds of, the transition of those properties to other people and the things that have to be done. But there will, we can talk about a number of reasons why a will is important. In families and in the Black community, you want to set out in your estate plan and your will who you want to have in charge. And because if you have four children and you are a widow and you pass away, there will be four people who will be running toward the steering wheel to try to get control of the your estate bus, as it were. And if you have put down in writing and you have done the proper formalities of how that should be handled, then what can happen is that those four children will know what to do at that particular time.
Right, there's instruction for them and direction.
And that is exactly right. And again, and it's not good enough to just write it down on a sheet of paper. There are certain formalities that have to happen in order for that document to be enforceable. So if mom takes the time to write down all of her instructions and to give the information about what she wants done with her property or how she wants her bodily remains to be handled, then in order for that document to have the force of law, certain formalities have to be
So
met.
all those things can be enveloped within the estate plan itself.
That's correct, but it's important to know that it is, the fact that we have done a plan is one thing. That is that I've written it down, but it also has to meet certain requirements. And
Well, I just wanted to just jump in and once again just turn our attention back to the Kerner Commission report. So in the 1960s, social and economic conditions resulted in the 1968 city riots, resulting from a clear pattern of severe disadvantage for African Americans. 50 years have passed, and African Americans are still faced with similar social and economic disparities. Additionally, many older African Americans find themselves leaving debt rather than generational wealth for their children. So how does this lack of social mobility affect the African American community, and can estate planning be a solution to combat this issue?
Yeah, I think that the systemic and problems in the Black community as it regards in regards to estate planning. I mean, and if we think about estate planning, that is that we understand at some point we're going to die, or we're not going to have the capacity to be able to handle our own affairs. Or that may come, but death is going to certainly come. And as we think about how that is to be managed and handled, any community can be advantaged by taking the time to plot out how that is to be handled and who's to handle what different things.
Well, we actually have a caller. Hello, caller. What's your question or comment?
Yes, I wanted to ask your guest attorney. This is a kind of a morbid question, but I guess if you've probably answered plenty of them in your time. If a senior wanted to put together, a will, does Illinois, I mean, can you be buried in Illinois without being embalmed? And I know that's a morbid question, but I'm wondering if you know if that's a possibility.
Again, as I have not done any specific research on it, but I am almost certain that the answer is yes. You can be buried in Illinois without embalming. I do not think that there is any requirement that it be a part of the bodily arrangements to deal with that.
Great. Thank you. That's a good
No
answer. I
problem.
appreciate it.
So
Thank you.
jumping off that a little
Thank
bit.
you, caller.
Thank you very much for your call, caller, and joining our show. Again, if you have questions or remarks at home and want to call in and talk to our guest today, call 312-738-1060.
Thank you.
I got the number wrong last week, and I got it right
you
today.
did.
So let me ask you a question, piggybacking off the caller's concern. So he was asking, like, if a person can be embalmed, right? In this state. So pivoting off that is a direction that could be maybe best left in a will.
That is correct.
And so what's the more important planning activity, Attorney Trice? Like, must folks have a will? Is an estate plan different? What are the different types of trusts? If you could run through that for us just briefly, let us know the different types and classifications of estate planning. As it were.
Okay, there are tools and techniques in estate planning that we use to meet some of our clients' objectives. When and I'm going to try to tie it back to where you pivoted from, and that is the bodily remains directions. One of the things that is occurring right now in our community is that the costs of burial and the costs of funeral arrangements are getting more and more expensive. And the being able to use a method such as cremation, which is generally a less expensive method of dealing with bodily remains handling, or green burials, they're doing those as well. But it is a way to handle that in a less expensive way by putting or directing your family on how you want your bodily remains to be handled and putting it in an instrument such as a will. It allows the family to understand what your wishes are, and that that if you thought that cremation was a good idea, or not being buried with being embalmed, or being entombed, or any of the methods that you can handle a body in Illinois, that allows you to spell that out. It allows the family to come around your instructions and make peace with what you have decided. You might not believe in cremation, but if your mother or the person who has put that in there decides that's what they want to do, they can do that. I was just going to finish up the point on the different types of estate planning tools and techniques. Generally, in estate planning, there's three tools that people should really focus around, and that is, number one is that we should have a power of attorney for health care. Again, if we do not have the capacity to make our own decisions in the healthcare setting, we are able to appoint somebody to make those decisions for us. A financial power of attorney is in place for taking care of our business affairs if we can't deal with those ourselves.
We actually have a caller. Hello, caller. What's your question or comment?
Oh, thanks for taking my call. I have a question for the attorney, Attorney Trice.
Yes.
Yes, is there a minimum amount a person can do estate planning with, let's say, people making minimum wage or $10 an hour and have no debt? Do you have a plan for them? And let's say, I'm just going to be sarcastic a little bit, like bucket beaters on the corners. You know, some of them might want to save some of their money. Do you have a plan for them?
And I appreciate your question.
Thank you, caller.
The one of the things that happens with estate, especially when you use the term estate, it tends to imply that there's a lot of money that is available, and I think that there's a misconception about estate planning, that if we administer an estate and we go and open an estate in the state of Illinois, it costs the same amount whether you're wealthy or poor at the county, and as we have less assets and resources, then the issue becomes more important that we do the estate planning that allows us to not be such a burden on the family. But to your point or to your question about I think that you should focus when you have a smaller estate on a couple of things, and that is, number one, if you do not do your plan, the state of Illinois or whatever state you live in the United States is going to have a plan already set for you. You need to understand what that is that the state of Illinois or whatever state you're in is going to do at that particular time. And if you have an understanding of what that is, and if it is contrary to what you want to do, then you need to spell that out. A will is a very inexpensive way to spell that out, but if you do it right and you have the formalities right, then it has the force of law, and the family can do as you wish.
Well, with that being said, what and when should you tell your children about their inheritance?
That's a good question. I mean, I think that the conversation about finances and the affairs of the estate should be constant and ongoing. It should be a lifetime conversation. One of the things, or one of the conversations that we generally have with our clients is that it is good to talk to your children about what you're going to do. It is bad to learn about a fire extinguisher in the middle of a fire. You don't want to be able to handle, or you don't want to have to handle a fire extinguisher when the first time that you learn about it in the middle of a crisis. So again, that conversation makes a lot of sense to have that in place.
We actually have another caller. Hello, caller. What is your question or comment?
Yes, how you doing? My name is Wally. I have a question for the attorney. Listen, I have an estate plan or a succession plan for to pass the house down. What I'm trying to I sit with the lawyer sometimes, and I listen to a lot of information, and I can't hold that information. And so a couple of months later, I can't recall certain things. And when you have to go back to the attorney, you have to pay a fee for his time. How can I get around that? Or could I have some kind of like recording of the conversation of questions that I asked him? Thank you.
Thank you for your question, caller.
That is, again, let me just say this as it pertains to you. Obviously, we cannot, give legal advice over the television here, and obviously each situation where you're dealing with an attorney, there's a different set of rules that each one has, or the way that they do business. What you want to do is to find an attorney who meets your needs, who answers your questions, that if you ask them over and over again, or you have to kind of, memorialize what it is that you are doing, I think that you can get there. If, you just have to find the right attorney to work with in that particular situation. I think recording is probably makes sense if you think that would help you to remember what was going on. But, something in writing for yourself, and then just to reintroduce that document again, so that you would be able to remember what was going on during that conversation.
Now, do all attorneys charge consultation fees? Would it be a good idea to maybe find one who doesn't charge consultation fees?
There are a number. I mean, obviously the internet is available to kind of do a little homework, but all attorneys do not charge consultation fees. Again, some do. Obviously their time is valuable, but some do not charge any fee for the services that they provide.
So before we allow Attorney Trice to plug his business and give him a chance to once again remind our television audience of where he is and what he does to help those in need, especially in this critical area of future planning, I want to ask you a rapid fire question.
Okay.
What age should you start an estate plan?
I think that the time that you should start the estate plan is just like what you were talking about earlier, is that it will be a component of your financial plan. To the extent that your estate plan becomes a more or a higher priority in your financial plan, it will be dictated by how important it is to you. You will have certain goals that you have all throughout your lifetime. What happens to me if I cannot take care of my own affairs? What happens to me if I die? And what happens
So the answer
to
could
my
be
family?
the answer could theoretically be as soon as possible,
As soon
early
as possible. Yeah,
but-
there's not a.
But the
there's-
answer is for sure is never too late.
That's right. And well, in estate planning, there's a thing called too late.
Well, I'm all about generational wealth, especially in the Black African American community, trying to grow the generational wealth. Because currently, the current gap between blacks and whites has reached its highest point since the 1989s, when whites have 17 times more wealth than black households. So, is estate planning a key component to trying to create the generational wealth for African Americans? And if so, what does that look like? We all know that estate planning, you don't have to literally be dead to estate plan, or you can do things like you talked about, the power of attorney that you can do while you're alive, where if something happens to you, you have something and someone in place to take care of your health care and your property at that time. But what are some other generational tools or wealth tools we can create as African Americans to grow our estate planning?
Right, and one of the biggest and one of the things that you were bringing up is home ownership is the number one asset within our community, and a lot of times because we fail to plan how those things will be handled, what we end up doing is creating a position where we created some wealth and one of the greatest assets in our community, and because we failed to plan for how we were going to transition that property, such as a house, we lose that property, and that family suffers as a result. They do not benefit from that asset being a part or growing within there. So the types of tools and techniques that come into play are things like life insurance, the will, or in Illinois we have what is called a transfer on death instrument, or a trust, a land trust we have in Illinois. Those are the types of techniques and tools that we have that are available that help preserve those assets for our families and continue the types of generational wealth that we want to grow. If we don't lose those assets, we tend to grow from those positions.
Well, thank you so much, Attorney Trice. I do want to say, in the event that you have questions and you can always send those questions to Help One Save One, and we can also reach out to Attorney Trice regarding that. Once again, we want to thank you so much for coming out to talk to us about estate planning and whether or not it is an effective tool in the African American community. It sounds like it really is an effective tool, and we all should be ready. We should all be interested in trying to create an estate planning for ourselves. Next week, we're going to be talking about family law. So we're really excited about that. So please tune in next week as well. Once again, thank you, Attorney Trice. And we want to thank you for tuning in our show here at Help One Save One.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you for inviting me in.
Thank
Absolutely.
you.